The world is changing faster than ever before. In the past 10 years, there has been an exponential technological evolution, the kind of technology that has revolutionized the world of work as we know it.
The Lawyers Hub was founded on the principle that law needs to interact more with technology, and that greatly affects tech policy as well as access to justice. So the Lawyers Hub exists as a confluence between law and technology, working on tech policy, on emerging technologies, as well as increasing and upskilling the knowledge of lawyers in the area of technology. We support tech startups as well to ensure that the tech ecosystem also engages in policy, but as well understand issues around data protection, issues that also concern their structure, as well as intellectual property.
If you look at the evolution of technology, it's been relegated as an alternative in most systems. But the realization that the 21st century has brought us into is that technology has to be an integral part of our day-to-day systems. And if you look at some critical technology areas like artificial intelligence, blockchain, nanotechnology, biotechnology, then it gives us a strong indication that if we do not start having discussions on the use of these technology areas, as far as law is concerned, then we may be in some kind of trouble. So lawyers are leading the debate on the use of these technologies, especially in Africa.
Over the years, the Lawyers Hub has supported the innovation ecosystem, convened events such as the Africa Law Tech Festival and the Global Legal Hackathon. The Lawyers Hub has also supported government innovations within the justice sector, as well as trained government institutions and more than 10,000 lawyers across Africa on emerging tech policy.
Our dream at the Lawyers Hub is to have open access to law. We envision a continent where there is access to justice through leveraging technology and with a crowd of enlightened lawyers. We see a continent that also protects its own through better tech policies, that emerging technologies, through its regulation, will offer better value and consumer protection for the people within Kenya and within the African continent. We envision that we will convene policy makers, regulators, as well as lawyers who are more enlightened on emerging technologies and with better digital skills. And we invite you to be a part of this great vision for Kenya and for Africa.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this event. And we are happy to have you, and we hope you're having a great day. Welcome to this session where we are going to talk about this timely and intriguing discussion on visa denials for Africans wishing to move to the Western countries. We are looking forward to your engagement, and feel free, to tell us where you're joining us from. That can be your country or your city. If you have any questions, feel free to share the same on our chats or the Q&A section. Also, we are not forgetting our YouTube audience. Feel free to engage us. Again, welcome, and we are hoping to have a very fruitful discussion regarding our today's topic. And to begin with, let me just give you a background on this topic. And at the Lawyers Hub, we offer immigration services, and that is mostly, visa and work permits for mostly Westerners who want to move into this country, to study, to visit. Kenya is one of the top tourist attractions, and, even to settle in Kenya. And, this process, as we do it, only almost on a daily basis, it's seamless and it's easy for for people from Western countries, to come to Kenya to conduct the activities that I have mentioned. However, in contrast, we have made our inquiry, and it has shown that it's almost impossible for majority of Kenyans to get travel documents, mostly visas, to these Western countries. And this trend continues across all the African countries. Mention them: Ugandans, Rwandese, Nigerians, Senegalese, all these people who are trying to, get a visa, to Europe, to North American countries. It's almost impossible for them to get their visas approved. And that has prompted this session and this discussion. We are happy to have you here, and we are looking forward to having a very fruitful discussion to dissect this topic and to understand why, why do Africans get majority of the visa denials when they are attempting to move to these Western countries for study, to visit, to do business and other activities. And now I would like to introduce our exceptional panelists, and I don't want to take anything away from their bio, so I will just give a very brief introduction, and then I will let the panelists dive in and introduce themselves. And so I will start with our very own, our CEO, that is Linda Bonyo. We are privileged to have you on this session. And Linda Bonyo is a digital law and data governance expert on the regulation of emerging technologies in Africa and its impact globally. So without going far, what I will do is that I will introduce one panelist at a time, and I will ask Linda to unmute and introduce herself, and then I'll move to the next panelist. Linda, if you can hear me. Okay, so as we wait for Linda, I will welcome Mr. Kunle Obebe. Mr. Kunle is an employment and immigration lawyer from Nigeria. I will let him introduce himself. Kunle, please, if you can hear me.
Thank you very much, Jackson. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Jackson, for inviting me. Thank you to the Lawyers Hub for having this very interesting conversation we're about to have. I think it's pertinent to have this conversation at this time. My name is Kunle Obebe. I'm the managing partner at Bloomfield Law Practice. I also head the immigration and the employment law practice group. I've been practicing immigration for over 20 years now, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kunle. And next on, I will ask Ms. Dorothy Omboto. Dorothy is an experienced law practitioner and specializing in migration and refugee law. I will let her unmute and introduce herself. Dorothy.
Thank you, Jackson, and many apologies for being late, a bit late. I'd communicated to Jackson that I had a board meeting which I was attending. Actually, it's not ended. I've stepped out for this meeting because I'd committed. So I'm Dorothy Omboto, and I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I'm also the managing partner at Ogejo Mboto and Kijala Advocates, where we have quite a robust international human rights and migration and refugee law department. So that is the qualification that gets me here. And recently, I also got an appointment to sit at the National Coordination Mechanism on Migration, which is a department that sits within the State Department on Immigration and Citizenship. So what it does, it deals with issues of policies on migration in Kenya, and I'm looking forward to serve there and also maybe to use my day and see the light of day. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. And last but not least, I will welcome Ms. Mata, who is the founder of Lago, to introduce ourselves. Ms. Mata, if you can hear me, please.
Yes, I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Go on.
Great. I have a bad cold, so apologies if my voice sounds a bit creaky. Delighted to be here. My name is Marta. I am your non-lawyer on the panel, probably. I worked most of my life in social policy and in policy research, specifically on migration and migration policy. And in recent months, in fact, took a keen interest on issues related to business and visitors visas to Europe and the UK. And I'm delighted to be able to share this, initial thoughts I have on this very important and I think often misunderstood topic. And I think it's great to have this opportunity to collaborate with professionals of the law to also understand better how together we can move the dial and hopefully promote some much needed reform in this space.
Thank you so much, Marta, and thank you for all the panelists for gracing this session, and we look forward to having an amazing engagement with you. And now it's my pleasure to welcome my colleague Wilson, who will introduce himself and give us a brief presentation, to set pace for our discussion today. Wilson, if you can hear me, take it on.
Thanks, Jack. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Go on.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you to all our panelists for joining today. My name is Wilson Mahome, working at the Lawyers Hub, and more specifically within the Research, Consulting and Advisory Department. For today's particular session, I just wanted to give a brief presentation, just covering today's topic on immigration and visas, just sort of paint a picture of the visa situation, not just in Africa, but hopefully around the world. So if you'll allow me, I'd like to share my screen just so that we can have visuals of what you're talking about. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, go on.
Thank you, Jack. So at the Lawyers Hub, typically what we like to do is just have a sort of overview of whatever topic you're talking about. And this we find is very, very important just for the audience, as well as anybody else who might be interested in understanding more about the topic. And so today what we've done is compiled the sort of sector statistics regarding visa and immigration at large. So one of the first things that we probably need to understand is, what do we mean when we talk about migration? Because migration is then directly correlated or links with visas. So a brief or a very, very basic definition of migration is to move from place to place, whether voluntarily or involuntarily. And this movement may be driven by a number of things. It may be as a result of war, and therefore you need to move to seek asylum or to seek refuge. You may be looking for better business opportunities. You may be a student or an individual who wants to further their studies. And so because of this, you may want to sort of relocate from your birthplace or from wherever else it is that you may reside. So the current global migration statistics, as we have found them, is that as at 2022, as at the end of last year and sort of moving towards this year, there are about 281 million people who live outside of their country of origin. And this accounts for about just a small percentage, which is about 3.6% of the world's total population. From this, the three other most common areas where people sort of tend to migrate to are Europe, Asia, and North America. And so as you can see from our statistics, there's about 89 million people who have migrated so far to Europe, 87 million to Asia, and 59 million to North America. So if you do a quick statistic, these three regions or these three areas constitute about 84% of the world's total immigrants. But as you can see again from one of the infographs there, is that Europe and Asia alone count for 61%. And so this one it's key because our topic of discussion today is acquiring visas to go to these particular places. And the most common places that people tend to go, as we mentioned, are Europe, Asia, and North America. So what do the global migration population statistics look like? As a representative of their total population, migrants in North America make up about 16% of the total population in North America. For the Oceania region, which includes parts of Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Samoa, those sort of areas, the migrant population is about 22% of the total population. For Europe, it's about 12%. Asia, it's about 1.9%, and Africa is sort of has the least number of migrants as a population of the total, which is about 1.8% of the total. And so, two of the most common countries that people tend to migrate to are Germany, which is in Europe, and the USA, which is obviously in North America. And as you can see from, again, our statistic, there has been a sort of increasing tendency in terms of migration, where in 1970, there were about 8.9 million migrants in Germany. And as at 2023, this figure has risen to about 18 million. In 1970, again, in the United States, there are about 12 million migrants. And as of the most latest statistics, this figure stands at about 51 million. In terms of demographic or the demographic representation, women make up for just about half of this of the migrant population. This is women and girls, which is about 48%. Whereas in terms of age bracket, the ages of 15 to 24, which is like the strongest age group, makes up for about 11% of those who tend to migrate. In America, more specifically, and this might come as a sort of surprise to a good number of people or those who may not necessarily have the statistics at hand, you'll find that the highest sort of demographic which tends to migrate to America comes from Latin America, which is at 43.2%. Asians, or those coming from Asia, are at 29.9%, which is close to 30%, Europe 11.7%, and Africa has the least or the lowest number of immigrants moving to America, with just 5.6%, of the total number of immigrants. So if you do a quick calculation, that will probably give you the specific number of African immigrants, because we've seen that as of 2023, there are about 51 million migrants in America. So doing a quick math will just give you the specific number. And so then this leads us to today's concept, or to another concept, which is the concept of the visa. So as I said when we started, that migration is directly related or linked to visa. And so you will find that people talk about visas, or people speak of visas. And this is because a visa is basically, or simply defined as an official document or endorsement, which is issued by a government and which allows a foreign individual to enter, stay, or live in a particular country for a specified period and for specific purpose. So visas are given or are dependent on quite a number of things, which could be the purpose of the visit, because there are different types of visas. Could be a travel visa, could be a student visa. There are quite a number of different visas. Something else that it is pegged on is the duration of the allowed stay. There are short-term visas, there are long-term visas, there are permanent residence visas, and another reason or another factor that is usually dependent on visa issuance is the associated conditions as well as restrictions. So visas serve as the legal authorization for entry into the host country, and the specific requirements and types of visas can vary from one country to another and depend on things such as, where you're coming from, which is your nationality, and which again will form a bulk of the discussion that we're going to have today, because our topic for today is basically visa denials to the West, and more specifically focusing on Africans. And another reason or another factor that may be dependent or that is pegged to your visa application is the reason for your visit. So moving on very, very quickly, we're going to look at the different types of visas that you may be issued with when you're making an application to move or to immigrate to the West. And so the first type of visa we're going to look at is the Schengen visa, which is perhaps the most popular visa. And so a Schengen visa is a type of visa that allows individuals to travel within the Schengen area, which is basically a majority of the countries in the European area. And so the statistics, as we've collated them, and this may come as a surprise to many who may not have these statistics at hand, is that as at 2022, the total number of Schengen visas that were made were about 7.6 million Schengen applications, and of this, about 3.5 were rejected. So this is close to 50% of the visas that were denied. And it's also interesting to note that out of the top 10 countries that had the highest number of visa rejections, 7 of them came from Africa. And this, as you can see, are Algeria, Guinea-Bissau, Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal, Guinea, and Mali, all with visa rejection rates of 40% and above. Something else to notice is that another place that is quite common in terms of trying to immigrate is the UK. And based on the statistics that we've collated, visa rejections in 2019 for Africa were 27%. The average rate of rejection was 12%. However, it's actually quite worrying, because if you look at the visa rejection rate in 2019 for UK visa applications for North Americans, for people coming from North America, it was just 4%. So this means that if you take away the 27% rejection rate of individuals applying from Africa, this means that the average rejection rate will shrink even further. For 2020, the average rejection rate for the UK visa was about 15%. But that notwithstanding, if you look at the 3 African countries with the highest rates of rejection, which were Ghana, Algeria, and Nigeria, these ones also have visa rejection rates to the UK of close to 40%, as in the case of Nigeria. And for Ghana, this rejection rate goes up to 46%. So again, compared to the average rejection rate of the continent, which is 15%, these 3 countries had what we can only describe as a significant rejection rate in 2020 for anybody making an application for a UK visa. Another visa that is actually quite common, another country, another destination that is quite common is the USA. And so the US, just as many other jurisdictions, has various types of visas. And so for this particular statistic, we're focusing on the B1 or B2 visa, which is basically a travel or a business visa. So the statistics as at 2022 read that there were about 6.8 million visas that were approved. And this notwithstanding, there was also a 15.77 average rejection rate. But again, look at the statistics for African countries, or for the leading African countries, the countries with the highest rates of rejection. These were Mauritania, Somalia, Burundi, and Chad. All of these had rejection rates of 2/3 and above. There's Senegal, which had 66, all the way up to Mauritania, which had close to 90% of the visa applications to the US being rejected. Now, again, it's critical that that we look at this in context, and the context is that if you compare this with other regions that made applications, and just picking a segment of these regions that made applications, an area or a country such as Monaco had zero. No application from Monaco, no visa application from Monaco to the US was rejected in around the same time. For Spain, it was at 10%. For Portugal, it was at 9%. Croatia, 5%, and Belgium, 8%. For South America, countries such as Argentina had rejection rates of only 3%. And so this, again, just paints a picture of just how varied the rejection rates can be depending on the region. And unfortunately, Africa seems to bear the biggest brand in terms of visa rejection rates, not just to the US, but as we have seen, to other very popular destinations in the West. For student visa, again, it's the same story. Africa, individuals applying for student visas to the US, Africa had a rejection rate of about 54%. And when compared to regions such as Asia, which was at 36%, and Europe, which was at an even lower rejection rate of about 9%, then this means that, there's a huge problem. And again, even the average rejection rates for US student visas was still way lower than the sort of average rejection rate for Africa at 31%. Again, a very high rejection rate for the continent. This is just a representation of the rejection rates based on the region. And as you can see, as they have been color-coded, West Africa sort of bears the biggest brand in terms of student visa rejections, at least for the year 2022. And there are about 71% of visa application rejections that came from West Africa. Central Africa is second, with about 61% of their visa applications for students being rejected. And South Africa is fortunate enough to just have a 16% rejection rate. But as you can see again from our map, South Africa only includes maybe about 5 countries, if you can look keenly, because it's just South Africa, probably Lesotho, Eswatini, Namibia, and Botswana. So there are also just a few countries, and this means that 16% is actually quite a low rejection rate as compared to the overall sort of rejection rate for Africa in terms of student visas. Something else that was also keen and that we found when we were doing our research was that, unfortunately, even if you are traveling or trying to travel to the US to pursue further studies, and you've been fortunate enough to secure funding, because one of the reasons that is given as a proper reason for rejection is that you've not been able to prove that you'll have sufficient funds to meet your education when you travel abroad. There's still 40% of those who have demonstrated that they actually have funding and whose visas are still rejected. So, which again begs the question of, if you are trying to pursue your visa, you're trying to pursue further education in a place such as the US, and you have secured funding, then as a student, what more do you need to show that will then allow the authorities in the US to give you your student visa? So there are about 40% of visa applications which were rejected for students who had already demonstrated that they had secured funding. By contrast, only about 10% of these visa applications were rejected from areas such as China and Brazil. Another area that is also very popular in terms of immigration, at least from an African perspective, is Canada. The statistic around Canada is that it tends to segment visa applications into two, which is a sort of French-speaking and English-speaking countries of the continent, which are the two most widely spoken languages on the continent. And so in terms of denial rate for the year 2015, for the years 2015 to 2023, the French-speaking countries sort of bore the biggest brunt in terms of visa denials, which was over 70%, whereas the English-speaking countries were just over 50%. However, there was a sort of break in this cycle for 2022, where the statistics for both French-speaking and English-speaking were almost similar. And I think the specific statistic is that the French-speaking countries faced a visa rejection rate to Canada of about 66%, whereas for English-speaking countries, this rejection rate was slightly lower at 62%. So again, Canadian visas, this is the average approval rate. It's just at about 59%. And as you can see, for Africa, the average approval rate for individuals who are going to Canada to pursue their studies is 59%. However, if you look at the statistic for Africa for both the years 2020 and 2021, the average approval rate was still higher than what Africans experienced for both years. So for the year 2020, this rate sort of deviated or moved from between 30% to 40%. And in 2021, it was about 36 to 44%. So again, still a lower approval rate for both years as compared to the average approval, which took into account other regions such as North America, which is the United States of America, Europe, and even Asia. This is again another infographic just depicting the statistics in terms of visa student permit rejections. As you can see, again, Africa, it's still bearing the biggest brunt with 64% of applications being rejected, compared to countries or areas such as Australia, Great Britain, and France, which all had rejection rates of 15% or less. And this would put us at about maybe 4 or 5 times more than these other areas. Again, just a quick representation of visa rejections to areas, to one of the most common areas where visas are rejected, and this is the province of Quebec. So in terms of visa rejections, for Francophone speaking countries, their rejections went as high as 70%, whereas for Europe, by contrast, this was just 10% in terms of visa rejections. So this is, again, something that is of interest to note. And so as we conclude, what are some of the most common reasons that are given for visa rejections? If you are in the audience or if you've had the opportunity to apply for a visa and this visa has unfortunately been rejected, some of the most common reasons that you are given would be that you have failed to show that you have enough money to support your journey to the country, because most of these nations probably tend to require that you have a sort of return ticket. As an applicant, they will also say that you've not demonstrated that you are willing to go back to your country of residence. Some of you have also been accused of not submitting complete visa applications, or in the alternative, you've not given all the necessary information or documentation relating to your application. Some other reason will also be given in the form of, a failure to prove rather that you are eligible for that particular visa category. So maybe you want to move as a student, but yet you made a travel visa application. So these are some of the most common reasons that are given in terms of visa denial. I think as I conclude, the one thing that I'd like to say is that what is evident is that the most significant effect of visas is financial. There is a huge financial implication in terms of visas and visa application. And just to paint a picture, a Schengen visa for the year 22 costs, or rather the rejections for Schengen visa applications cost about 64 million euros. This means that the number of individuals who applied for a Schengen visa and were denied, their applications cost 64 million euros. And that is a huge sum of money. Just to bring it down to the individuals, the cost of a Schengen visa is about 80 euros for an adult, and it's about 40 euros for a child. For the USA, a student visa or a visitor visa cost about $185, while for the UK, a visa is about $127 for short stays of up to 6 months. So this means that at the end of the day, you might look at it in very, very different ways, but make no mistake that visa issues are issues to do with finance. And I think we've had from some of the very, very popular destinations that they plan on increasing their visa application fees just so that they can sort of increase their revenues. So it's the two are correlated, and it's hard to move away from the fact that visas are also a cost issue, because the other thing that, as we've seen, is that visa denials are also, they also stem from applicants having or showing or not showing an ability to sort of foot their bills in terms of going, being able to comfortably stay and then coming back. So at the end of the day, there's also a financial issue, which should also be not be overlooked. And I think with that, I would like to stop there for today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wilson, for those statistics. I think they paint a picture of the reason we are having this session and what we want now to discuss. And maybe what you have not mentioned is that even these visa rejections and approval rate are tied to the GDP of this country. So if your country is, the way they refer to them, if your country is poor, you're not likely to get a visa. But if you're from a rich country, it's easier for you to get a visa to these Western countries. Now, what I would like us to do is, before we usher in our panel, is maybe to just, hear one or two stories, from people in the audience. I think I will give one or two people who have faced a visa rejection. Maybe they come and tell us, which is this reason that was given to you when your visa was denied. Maybe we get, I don't know if there is anyone who would like, to tell us about their rejection from the audience. Just raise up your hand and, we will let you tell us your story in just 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, I'm trying to see if anyone has raised their hand so that we can allow them to speak. All right. So yeah, let me unmute Valerie. So Edna, if you're able to speak kindly, Edna.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Yes, my name is Edna Arati. Yes, I'm an advocate, but at the same time, I run a travel agency called Gaidin Travel and Logistics. I travel a lot, but also I book my clients to all destinations. I have several rejections, sometimes for my clients, like in the recent 2 months. In the past 2 months, I've had quite a number of rejections. And actually now my clients are not even getting a feedback of the reason why, as to why they're being rejected. Even when you feel like you've met all the requirements that are there in the visa processing requirement section, we do a checklist for the clients, and then we apply for them. But a client comes back dissatisfied, is told that, in fact, can I give you an example? In Europe, last week we had a client who was rejected, but there was no explanation. And now when as a travel agent, you have a client who's rejected and you've taken their money for processing fee, you failed. Most of the time, we know it's the financial support that is given as a reason, like why there is a refusal. Like maybe you don't show like you have enough a fund to sustain you. And sometimes they say like if someone is traveling on visit visa, then they give like a hotel accommodation and a return ticket. More often, some of these countries, they feel like maybe this person is just going to disappear and never come back. And that sometimes that's not the reason. Someone wants just to go for holiday and come back. So when you reject on an account of you are not sure this person is not coming back, then it's very unfair. And thirdly, when someone, like for instance in the US, they say you do not have social ties, is that enough reason for them to reject a person who wants to go travel for visitation? Then they should have a way of tracking these people to ensure that they return them, as opposed to denying them visa because you've already judged them before they commit what you are anticipating them to commit. I feel like that is my take, that is the reason why they feel like maybe these clients are not going to come back. On the financial part, we have situations where also they say that someone has not demonstrated they have enough finances to sustain their stay there. And this person has given you a return ticket that is valid, but it's not all the time that you have money sitting in the account to show that this is the money that I'll use when I travel to this particular destination. So we are having challenges, and especially when a client is not given a reason. I had a rejection that 2 weeks ago to Austria. The client came back and I was like, can you tell us what they told you? It's like, no, I think there's even a language barrier. Those people are not speaking properly to me. They did not even give me a reason. This is a person who works in a bank. Is a senior person who works in a bank in Kenya, has a family here, and wanted to go for a wedding and has given all the documents in relation to his support, his return ticket, even has visas from other countries. But it felt like, I'm sorry to say, my client was Somalia, of a Kenyan Somalia. It felt like maybe these people discriminated me because of where I come from or something. So, like now there's also those, maybe they classify, people are classified in these places, and then in these embassies, they classify Africans, and that's what some of my clients feel like we're classified, and that's why we are denied visa. So I would like to get an answer.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Edna. That's quite a lot, because we have also seen in the presentation that actually 40% of students who have received a scholarship, they have been accepted in a university, they have been provided funding, but still 40% of these students are rejected. So I think maybe there might be something more other than being able to show that you have the finances, or you have the route to your country. And I'm hoping that we can be able to deconstruct that. We can be able to find answers in this conversation. I will allow just one more person, but this needs to be a personal case and on the reason you were given for your rejection, and then we can move on. I will give Lilian Nyagasi a chance, and please, Lilian, just 2 minutes maximum.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lilian Nyangasi, and I would like to share a personal story about a visa application I made way back in February 2019. I was connected to some friends and a church in America, and I was to go and attend a church conference for 7 days. However, on making my visa application, I was not married. So I did not have any particular relations in accordance with the visa officer that would compel me to come back to Kenya. And also I was a pupil and I did not have a salary per se. So in my visa application, I did indicate interesting, but looking back to then 2019, I was not even given the reasons as to why my visa was denied, because on the D-Day, I walked up to the American embassy and I was given only 2 minutes to express myself, and my documents were not even assessed, or they did not even look at the documents I had taken to put up my case for approval of the visa. So I was denied on the spot. And looking back, I feel like I was denied, number one, because I was not married. I was a single girl, very young and very ambitious, and I wasn't even admitted as an advocate. Number two, I feel like finances also worked against me, because being a pupil, most of us have seen the circumstances under which pupils work in Kenya, and I wasn't earning anything official per se. I used to receive an informal stipend of about 15,000 Kenya shillings. So that is just a brief overview of my experience with visa applications. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And on the chat, I can see a case whereby someone says that my mother was denied a visa to Canada. That is, Irene said, my mother was denied a visa to Canada 5 times to visit my sister. She was a retired teacher, and the refusal was, the refusal that she did not have ties to home country, which is something you cannot prove without employment. These are the many cases, from people who are not able to travel to these countries. And I think the discussion today is we are trying to contrast, because if you're coming from, let's say, UK or America and you want to apply for a visa in Kenya, nowadays it usually takes around 10 minutes to make the application. Once you have uploaded around 5 to 6 documents that they ask, then your visa is approved. Doesn't take any time. In Kenya, you don't need an appointment in the embassy for you to get your visa. If you're coming from these European countries or the American countries, you don't need an appointment. It takes quite, a small time. But right now, if you want to apply for a visa, maybe a Schengen visa, it will take you maybe months even to get that appointment. And as Wilson said, it will cost around 80 euros. This is around almost 13,000 Kenya shillings. When you look at it in terms of Nigerian nairas, this is around 145,000 nairas. And when you look at some of the countries in Africa, they don't even have, these consulate services. You have to travel to the neighboring countries, to get these, consular services. And right now, I just want to, welcome our first, panelist. And what I have gotten from Wahome's presentation is that we have around 281 million people who live in, these countries where they were not born. When you look at Africa, we have a population of around 1.4 billion people if you count up to September of 2023, and only around 40.6 billion people, that is as of 2020, were living in Europe or America or Asia. And Africa only accounts for less than 15% of the total global migrant population. But then this brings me to the first question. And my question is, why Africa? Why is Africa the continent that suffers the most visa rejections to travel to the West? And this question will go to all the panelists, but allow me to begin first with Mr. Kunle. West Africa is the region which we have seen as the most visa refusals, to travel to countries like Canada and the US and the UK. We have seen countries like, Nigeria and Ghana topping these charts. So, Mr. Obebe, just, give us a perspective. What factors contribute to this phenomenon, and compare it to the West, immigrants who need to settle in Africa?
Thank you very much. I think the first thing you have to consider is you have to look at the state of the economy of these countries. You will notice that the data that was given was basically post-COVID, and a lot of the economies are currently struggling. Nigeria case in point, Ghana as well. And because of that, you have a lot of particularly young people that are looking at how they can emigrate out of the country. And that, because of the volume of applications that they are having now, that is the reason why it's very obvious the number of refusals that are currently happening. And I'm happy with the data that you shared ahead. I also got a bit of data as well with regards to the F1 visa that was issued. I think the Voice of America reported that in 2021, 23,229 F1 visas were issued across Africa. But in 2022, 30,700 were issued. That means that there was an increase. But in spite of that increase, you also see that there's a huge number of rejections as well. So the first thing that we have to note is the fact that there has been a huge increase in the number of applications, and that's due to the economic effects of post-COVID that we are seeing in those African countries.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kunle, for these insights. And if you just joined us, today we are here to discuss about, the visa refusals. And this discussion is informed by the fact that at the Lawyers Hub, where we offer immigration services mostly to these Western immigrants who want to come to Kenya, to conduct business, to study, we help them, to get a work permit or a visa. It's so easy, for them to get these visas in Kenya and even in the rest of these African countries. However, for us Africans, if we need to move, to Europe or North America or Australia, getting these visas is almost impossible. And that is why we are having this discussion to establish why is that the case. And now I would like to, invite Ms. Martha, and let's talk about UK. And very many people, especially Kenyans, have tried to move to UK as, caregivers, to work there or study. But then, as we have seen, even though the average rejection of visas to the UK is, at around 15%, that is for 2022, still African countries are recording almost half, of their total visa applications getting rejected. And my question to you, Ms. Martha, would be, why not reciprocate, visa issuance? Why are Africans being denied visa, to enter into UK, maybe to work or study?
Thank you, Jackson. Let me start by telling you a little story, like others have done, which is one of the stories that really got me interested in visas. And I think it highlights the issue with the lack of reciprocation, as you said, the reciprocity and the unequal balance on visas. And here I'm very much focusing on business and visitors visas, so temporary visas, typically 90 days, for example, in the Schengen visas to Europe. And I'll come to the UK in a minute. the story that actually was the trigger that got me to finally pay more attention to visas is, in fact, the last of many. I think, like all of you, in the last few years, I really began to pick up that as on the global stage, issues of migration became more and more politically tense. This notion of visiting, I think the example that we had earlier, somebody wanted to go and see a relative in a country, typically, say, a grandmother wanted to go and meet, their newly born grandchildren, for example, who live somewhere else. So something that is very much in the space of temporary travel, visiting exactly, not necessarily migrating, related to the figures that we saw at the beginning of this discussion that typically look at people who move from one country to another to live. And that it was becoming increasingly difficult for people to visit. And because I've been working for so long on migration, and I was very aware of the toxic narratives around migration policy, I began to worry a little bit that something as normal as visiting, as normal as going somewhere for a business meeting, for a conference, to see a friend on holiday, was so affected, or to study was so affected by the global migration toxic debate. This, to my mind, this became very vivid, and it comes to your point about reciprocity, when earlier this year, the Venice Architecture Biennale opened in Venice, which is, of course, a very important festival, an event, global event, where all leading designers and architects go and attend. This year, the Biennale focuses on Africa. The curator of the Biennale is a Scottish-Ghanaian architect called Leslie Loco. And when she opened at the opening ceremony and at the press conference of the Biennale this year, she mentioned that she had some collaborators, a photographer and I think a designer from Accra that she works with, who needed to travel to Venice for the opening of the Architecture Biennale, and they were denied the visa by the Italian ambassador in Accra on the grounds that they could not be trusted to not overstay their visas. And in the explanation, in the communications from the embassy, there was something along the lines as sort of young African men were likely to overstay their visa and not coming back. Now, this, if it wasn't absurd enough in its, in its own right, that you dedicate a global festival on African architecture and you don't allow professionals from Africa to be part of the event, only a few weeks later, it was announced that the next year, Art Biennale, so every other year, the Biennale in Venice focuses on art and architecture. So next year will be art. The topic of next year Biennale in Venice will be foreigners everywhere. And the curator has chosen global migration and, identity as foreigners as the topic of the exhibition. And I thought to myself, well, they better fix the visa regimes before that. Otherwise, it would be tough to get some of the artists that work on those issues to come to Venice. Now, I'm telling you these stories that, are funny and surprising and absurd because they really highlight what's at stake here. Of course, for those who are denied visas, but fundamentally to all of us, because it is everybody's losses if an artist cannot attend the opening of a world, event like an art biennale where perhaps they have their work exhibited. It is to the loss of that grandchild that the grandmother cannot come to visit. It is the loss of the entertainment industry in the UK. London wants to be a major, talent hub and attraction, for example, for Afrobeats, if musicians cannot travel. So that's one, in terms of why there's such high rejection rates for Africans applicants. It has been mentioned a number of times. I've also looked into the data and wrote a piece on it. It is clear that the GDP of a country and levels of and sort of economic growth is one of the variables that affects the outcome. I'm sure there are many others, but it is quite clear looking at the data, and therefore a number of African countries that have relatively low GDP are affected. You could be satisfied with that explanation. If that's the reason, obviously people who come from poorer countries, are perhaps, have fewer opportunities than others, and therefore we can assume they're going to overstay their visas. I think that's hugely problematic in terms of, the whole purpose of the visa regimes that has to have elements of reciprocity. I very much doubt that there is solid evidence that there is, overstay rates that can be so systematically traced back to GDP to GDP in countries. We are talking about, as I said, business and visitors visas, where people have needs everywhere in the world to come for temporary visits in different, to different countries. But back to the point of reciprocity, both in Europe and for the UK, what is particularly surprising is what some of these countries are that have such high rejection rates. Take the Schengen data that we looked at earlier. Yes, Ghana, Nigeria, particularly high. Senegal is very high. Now, the European countries are really, really keen to increase return rates of so-called irregular migrants to Senegal, and at the same time, that deny visitors and business visas to Senegalese applicants. That's not going to work politically, right? It's not going to be there's not going to be a reciprocal arrangement, and unsurprisingly, return rates and acceptance of returnees for Senegal are very low. Similarly, Morocco has over 30% rejection rates on Schengen visas. Morocco is a key partner of the European Union. It receives a lot of money from the EU to manage migration and to manage borders, and at the same time has such high rejection rates. Moving to the UK, again, Nigeria and Ghana come up again. Now, Nigeria and Ghana are key trading partners in the UK, of course, ex-colonies. The UK is about to host next year a UK and Africa investment summit. James Cleverly, the foreign secretary, was in Lagos only a few months ago, posting about the commercial importance of the relationship with Nigeria, specifically picking on Afrobeats as, and the boom of the industry in the UK, and how crucial it was for the UK music market. And at the same time, Nigerians, so music producers, were flagging that some of their best musicians could not travel to the UK. So it really is to the detriment at both ends that this happens. And so we can try to pin down why. Things like GDP will always be part of the explanation. I think discriminatory practices and racism are also clearly a factor here, because of all the experiences that people have, bring in terms of personal stories. But I think that really focusing on the mutual loss that is the effect of such high rejection rates for, again, temporary business, leisure, tourist visas, that that really need to be highlighted, and what it will be in for both parties to unlock that system. In the summer, I was contacted by a platform that works with African professional cyclists. There was a cyclist and an Eritrean cyclist that compete in the Tour de France. He was going to move on to compete to a professional race in Glasgow in the UK, and he was refused a visa, even coming from France. Again, that's a problem both for the cyclists, but also for the race and for the organizers, that they're going to miss out on one of the competitors. And so, highlighting this issue of reciprocity is really important. Two quick final thoughts. We are focusing today very much on the experiences of African applicants visiting and traveling to the so-called West. Only last week, I work with African cities, and a platform of African and European cities working together on issues of migration and mobility and facilitating exchanges between cities. We're particularly working with creatives and the creative economy. And we had an opportunity to facilitate the participation of some Sierra Leoneans fashion designers to the Durban Fashion Fair and Business Fair, which was an incredible opportunity for some of these designers that rarely, never had the opportunity to show their work in international fashion events. Well, it took a trip to Accra even to apply for a visitor's visa to South Africa for Sierra Leonean nationals. It took a trip to Accra to the consulate. It required, they stayed for a few days. The visa was not granted. They came back to Freetown. It was only delivered the day before the departure at the very last minute, at the same time when the representative from South Africa came to visit Freetown to begin this process of collaboration a few months before, of course, she can apply for a visitor's visa on arrival at Lungi Airport in Freetown. And so just highlighting that these issues of sort of different levels of GDP and poverty replicate both within the continent and outside, and this will be worth, I know far less about this, but I was actually really struck by how difficult it was for these Sierra Leone professionals to be able to travel to Durban in South Africa. Very final thought, Brexit. It really came home here. I mean, I'm Italian originally, so I'm lucky enough to have a European passport, so I'm not that affected. But I'll tell you the shock that came to some of my British friends and colleagues to realize that with Brexit came the reality of no longer having the right to travel to Europe. And so again, to really bring back home to those who refuse visas, what it means for them, as well as what it means for those whose visas are rejected. And when it comes to costs, the figures that were cited earlier were shocking, the 64 million euros, the individual costs are also terrifying. Imagine if you could add to those costs all the opportunity costs for those who cannot go to, be part of a conference, be part of a business deal, or be on a stage for a major concert, and the other way around, the loss of the economies at the receiving end for not allowing visitors, tourism businesses to come and visit. And so I really think that more work on costs as well as causes is what hopefully will take us to at least some reform steps, which are badly needed, because with various, with economic crisis and labor skill gaps all over the world, this situation, the current visa regimes really limit the economic potential of human mobility that can bring so much benefits, as we know, across different continents. Thank you for this opportunity. I hope we'll have the chance to discuss with others too.
Thank you so much, Martha, for that. And I agree with you. We need to, look at the cost. If you're not issued the visa and you paid for it, why don't you have your money back? Now allow me to quickly jump to our CEO, Linda, who will give her thoughts on this topic, and probably she will speak about using AI to determine these visa applications. Linda, if you can hear me.
Hi everyone, and please forgive me if there is noise in the background. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly.
Okay. Can you hear me? Is it okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I was going to make a few comments, and you'll forgive me, I'm just in between traveling. But I was going to make a few comments in my experience on how all these sort of visa regimes are happening. So first on AI, I think it's been determined, different countries, for example, I think Canada has been accused of using artificial intelligence to score people, and they're using automated decision-making processes to just determine who's going abroad and who's not going. And that has been found to be biased. I remember there was a huge conference I hosted in Canada. It was called Black in AI. And so many Black people were unable to actually make it to Canada because of this scoring that they were using to determine sort of that the visa applications. I think there's also a key report from the Netherlands about the government of the Dutch government actually using AI in using to determine these application processes. So the issue with the use of AI is that ideally there's no human intervention, and many times they will tell you you're able to appeal, but it just means that if the quota is that you must be earning, let's say, 50,000 Kenya shillings, and you're not earning that, it doesn't matter whether you run a business or not. It's simply standardized in a manner that doesn't give credence to individuality and how different we are. And it's like in court as well, the way you're just told, you know what, the fine is 200,000, whether you do this or not, we must have points of mitigation so that you can sort of mitigate your case. But I wanted to say 5 things that I think, in my view, I have learned. I've had a UK visa rejected before, and I made noise about it on social media. I think that was like 5 years ago. And I've had a bit of experience, traveling to different continents and just knowing how, visa regimes have been. And so the first thing is, I think we live in a gig economy, and we live in an economy that people love to ideally move from job to job. But I realize that keeping a job really shows your ties to your home country, and it helps you to get a visa. And number two, this is a joke I make with my friends, but we usually say Africans don't travel for leisure, they travel for work. It's easy to go for a conference than to go to visit relatives. And so it's good wherever place that you're working at to constantly find ways in which you're traveling to other places for conferencing. And we found even for the UN conferences especially are very important for this. The first time I went to Germany was through a UN conference, and they didn't charge us visa fees because then it is sort of gratis. It's zero rated by the UN. And chances are is that they'll give you opportunity to attend these conferences. So internet governance forums, if you're into climate change and stuff like that, it's important to go. And please do not jump your visa. So don't think that I'll go for this conference and then jump my visa. Jumping your visa just means you cannot work. You're in a country where you don't have a work visa. You can just be a waiter or waiting on tables when at that point, maybe you went to school for something else. So you're not supposed to leave your country, thinking that you want to go out there and jump your visa. It will not help you. You'll suffer even way more than you think you are suffering now. And then also 3 is to just, have some creditworthiness in your bank. And this is not to say to have a lot of money, but they look at consistency. Because sometimes people just say, forward me money so that there's money in my account, they see that there's money and then they give my visa. But there's no consistency. So use your bank over your M-Pesa to show that, because we're ideally not at points where banks are, embassies are asking for your M-Pesa, but they're asking for your bank statement. So have some bank statement and be consistent in the way that money is moving in. It doesn't have to be a lot. Most of the time, it has to just be consistent. And then also to look at, Rome was not built in a day, build a travel score. So make sure that you're traveling to other small countries. We live here, but many times you've not gone to Uganda, you've not gone to Tanzania. Just cruising through by bus to another country shows that this is actually a traveler who's interested in traveling, rather than for the first time you want to travel to the US on a blank passport. So you must show that your passport also has had, this kind of experience, because many of the questions on this visa forms will ask you, which countries have you been to? And then the 5th one is, please do not fill embassy forms when you're not ready. Because sometimes we think those forms are not taken seriously. They are taken seriously. Consult a lawyer and see that ideally you know what you're filling in, that they also understand where you're trying to go to. It's also important, I think, in my view and in experience, like if you have kids, let them travel if you can. Let them also build that particular, travel score. And this I've tried to do with my children and made sure that, when I'm going to whatever country, if I'm able to afford it, can we then travel together? It helps them. And it helps to build up from that specific level. I've seen programs like ISEC, which helped students to travel to volunteer in other countries, and through exchange programs, which are useful. I think in terms of travel, also we've seen embassies really helping their alumni. Like, for example, the Germans through the DAD program. We've seen the US Embassy through the Tech Women Fellowship and the YALI program, really helping the people who join these programs to ideally travel for the first time abroad through this particular program. So it's useful to be part of those particular stuff. And then just to say that I think for the Kenyans in the room, Mombasa is so expensive. Sometimes I don't know why we all travel to Mombasa for the holidays. And that time a hotel room is too pricey. Right now we are enjoying visa-free status to South Africa, for example. If you can afford to go to Mombasa and pay for all those hotels, you can share with a friend and book flights early. Use there are websites that have they have these hacker fairs where they have flights that are super cheap, and you can go to South Africa and just let's go on your passport, because ideally then you'll be saying, I've been to 5 countries in Africa, and now I've been to maybe to another continent, maybe Asia. Now I want to go to the US, or now I want to get a Schengen visa. And then finally is to look at what are the countries that ideally are open enough for visa processes. So for example, for Schengen visas, countries that own an airline ideally want more tourists in their countries. So you'll see, for example, the openness that Paris has, and the French, and Italy, because it's a touristic city. And so there'll be more forgiving of tourists to visit their countries. But if you're looking to go to, let's say, the Norwegian, Scandinavian countries, they're very strict with their visa regimes. They will reject a first visa application. And so it's useful to sort of know those dynamics and what to do with it. And I think for the UK favors students because it makes a lot of money from student visas. But you must determine that you ideally want to go and study from the UK in that sense. So those will be my few remarks, and just say that, seek help before you fill these forms. Don't do them alone and you think that it's cheaper to be, because a rejection is not good for you, because you always have to declare, has your visa been rejected before? You have to say yes. You don't want that. You want a very clean slate so that when you apply once, you get it that one time. Yeah, so those are my comments, unless there's any question. I hope it was useful for someone.
Thank you so much, Linda. And my key takeaway is that if you're able to, travel to your neighboring countries, get those stamps, if there are other visa-free countries you can travel to, so that maybe when you want to go to these Western countries, at least you have something to show, then that would be great. Now, allow me to welcome Dorothy. Dorothy, you have been vocal on issues of having, fairer policies on visa. And my question to you will follow what we have discussed and what Wahome said. We have seen the various reasons why visas are rejected. And I think Linda has also, given some clarity in some of those issues that Wahome touched on. But Dorothy, do you think these are, these reasons, are they reasonable? If I can put it that way, are these reasons for the rejection reasonable? Like you don't have, ties to your country, you don't have enough money, or does racism also play a part? I think in 2022, it's called the IRC, that is Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada, admitted while responding to House of Commons Standing Committee on Citizenship that there is systematic racism, within visa regime and even in the organization. Could you respond to that in terms of, are the reasons given for rejection actually reasonable, or, racism plays part?
Thank you, Jackson. And I want to hope I'm clear enough. Yes. Absolutely. First of all, let me just say, Linda, my fellow panelists have really given great points. And Linda has given you the 101 on if you want to travel to Western countries today, what do you do? So those are really good points, which I know many people are looking up to. But let me begin by saying that, being the lawyer that I am, migration, what we need to understand at the back of our minds is that migration or immigration is just like citizenship, is a sovereignty issue. And that's why you'll find that you will never be able to take a country or an embassy to court over denying you a visa. And also you find that some people have even raised this issue that some systems are very opaque and they just tell you, they don't give you a reason as to why they are denying your visa. This is basically because sovereignty is, migration is a sovereignty issue and is solely determined by that country on what they want to do. That said, I also want to say that being that it's a sovereignty issue, it means that the best way to go around this or to solve this in the long term will be through policy change, lobbying, advocacy, and such like things, since we cannot do it through litigation. I want to give an instance, an example of how lobbying and advocacy then will trickle down to these changes before I address the issue of racism, which is definitely very alive and plays a major role in visa rejections. You will find that in the past, medical grounds was used as a rejection. Remember, there used to be a time when, and maybe some embassies still do this, when you could have, your visa could be rejected on medical grounds. That is, you're asked, are you suffering from this? If you say yes, then they use that as a reason. But this issue was vocally advocated for by human rights advocates and lobbyists, and the media played a very huge role in this to ensure that that was abolished because it was against human rights. Same way, I want to believe that issues of policy and transforming visa refusal is an issue which us as advocates, African advocates and African lobbyists must actually take upon ourselves to make it known, make it be out there and let it be known that the scales are not biased, are not balanced. We are being, these people are getting an easy time coming to our countries, but we get a very hard time to visit these countries, you know, so that people can access education or work or whatever it is. I saw somebody even saying that, and actually even Jackson asked this, that when your visa is rejected or declined, why then do they return our money? Politics and policies have a play in this. Do you know that the funding we get in Africa is actually majorly funded by the rejections of visas? So a portion of the funds they make from rejections of visas is what is then given back to these African countries as aid in quotes. So you can see this financial game or aspect of it then is what they are using to sort of, balance and play around. And so you'll find like they have these quotas where they say, okay, we have to have this number of rejections, and also to reduce operational costs. You can imagine when your visa is rejected, it's cheaper than when they earn more rather than when your visa is actually accepted. That said, yes, racism plays a part. And how can then applicants better navigate those kind of challenges of racism and whatever? So some of the tactics, of course, which you've already been told are the obvious ones, like making sure your application is like on point and making sure that maybe you seek professional help. And of course, the one I've mentioned on advocacy and lobbying, and just to also maybe talk on other issues like the fees towards these visitors. Our countries definitely need to look at this, and those games which are being played where rejection fees are now then being returned to us as aid. We need to be vocal about these things. We need to our governments need to do better and be answerable to the people and actually get policies, Western policies that actually favor people. I want to also add that, as I mentioned on the human rights activism on the medical grounds, fair administrative justice can also be addressed in the same way, such that I'm not applying for a visa, then you just reject it on merit. If we actively advocate for this, for fair administratively, where then we are calling upon, we are using human rights approach to then address these issues, I think it will then open up or demystify this visa rejection thing, such that it will not, when you're rejected, then you are given a chance to actually appeal. But I also want to point out that there is a reason. There's one more reason. Of course, there are many reasons which some have been mentioned, and some because of time maybe we cannot mention, but that exacerbates or promotes the rejection of African student visas. This is the fact that I don't know if people know it or it's out of ignorance. There are appeal systems. When your visa is rejected, there is an appeal system where you can actually, and especially where you have followed every whatever to the T, you can actually appeal. But since many Africans, they get rejections and then they just keep quiet, this encourages these embassies to just keep on rejecting the visa. I have had clients who've gone through these appeals and succeeded. And, especially when you can and involve the media, or you want to bring issues of unfairness, the embassies don't like that kind of negative publicity. And when you are very sure that your visa has been rejected on grounds which you feel are unfair, I really encourage people to kindly appeal, especially where in those systems which they offer that room for appeal. And on the issue of racism, that is there. And yes, as Jackson had mentioned, the IRCC, which is the Standing Committee on Citizenship, recommended to this committee, which is called the Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship of Canada, that they should conduct a bilingual study to study the social history of anti-Black and anti-Francophone African racism in Canada immigration to ensure that mistakes are not repeated. So you can see these countries already are taking actions to cure the problem, but what are we as Africans doing back home in our soils where they want to come to address the problem? I like what Nigeria did with Canada. Canada at some point was really issuing high rejection rates for Nigerian student visas. In turn, we had Canadian businessmen who were really applying for business visas to access Nigeria. So Canada was making a lot of money from Nigeria, but because now the media the lobbyists took up this issue, and it was quite aired in the national and the international community, Canada had to relook or review its stand and started issuing or giving better conditions for Nigerian student visas. So you can see how powerful the media and how powerful lobbying and policies can affect or reverse the trend. Because of time, I also want to just leave it at that so that we give time for Q&A and other deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. This has been so insightful, and we have been able to see all these factors. We have also received insights on how you can easily be able to get a visa to these Western countries. And this is a discussion I think we cannot deconstruct in just 2 hours. I think this is a discussion that needs to continue. I will urge all of you, to go there out to social media, tag our page at Lawyers Hub on Twitter and at Lawyers Hub Kenya on Twitter, and let us engage on this discussion. As Dorothy has said, I think let us advocate for change in these policies. And this brings me to, the last question, and for the panelists also to give their closing remarks before we take any questions that are on Q&A. And this question is really what should be done to ensure that these visa decisions are, they are unbiased and they are also fair. What should be done? Of course, we have had Dorothy, giving us the pointers on how to do advocacy and lobbying, and I will let the panelists, give us their thoughts on this, and also, give their closing remarks. And I will start with Marta. Marta, if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry, my voice is getting worse and worse as it
so sorry
progresses.
about that.
Don't worry, it's fine. It's just a cold. But just to say, I wanted to, first of all, thank you all for this sort of insightful conversation. My main comment closing this is how important it is that we connect across those of us who look at these issues from a policy perspective and trying to think about sort of what the implications are of this process with all your experience of working with individual submissions and recourse, as we just heard, and really try to think about more of sort of alliances of action and policy and research around visa issues, because it's a very it's a bit of a, like, it's increasingly visible and it's increasingly being discussed, but it's a bit of a side conversation, as I said, on some, at least in the policy space, on the migration debate. On a personal level, I'm working quite closely with IOM right now, who traditionally does not work much on temporary visa because they work mostly on sort of migration policies, to really, as part of an engagement with African and European member states, to really encourage them to take up sort of visas and visa regimes as part of what they do. So this is something very practical that in the policy space, I can sort of push forward. And then secondly, on a sectoral level, how certainly within the creative industries and this, interest, a very significant interest that there is in Europe and beyond on African arts, fashion, and music, how that really provides a platform to really highlight the urgency of reforming visa regimes to reap the benefits of all this potential. So very concretely, these two things where I feel I can remain in touch with you and perhaps work together on.
Thank you so much, Martha. And the same question to Mr. Kunle.
Thank you very much. I have sort of a different perspective that I look at this question. I feel that we have to look inwards. A lot of times we have to question. Yes, I agree that policy plays a huge role in determining the visa processes, but it's also important that we look inwards as well. If you, case in point, look at India, for instance. India is the highest exporter of human capital in the technology space. And how have they been able to do that? They've been able to look inwards. They've been able to develop their technology industry to a level that they have so many Indians that are all over the world now. And as a result of that, they've been able to export a lot of human capital outside India. I believe that's what we need to also do. It's very easy to point the finger at racism and say that, oh, it's because I'm Black, that's why I'm not getting the visa. But also we have to look at the GDPs of our countries as well. How are we developing our countries? And what are we doing? What are the governments doing to be able to encourage, for instance, development of education in our countries? Because the more you do that, and that's the reason why I find Kenya quite interesting, because of the kind of development that has happened in the technology space in Kenya over the years. And as a result of that, you will start to see, the truth is that Africa has the youngest population demographic in the world. And as a result of that, there would be need for Africans to migrate to other countries at some point. So let's look inwards. Let our governments create policies that will develop the human capital. And once that is done, the other countries, the Western countries, will have no choice but to invite us. I think it's important to note that some countries are visa-free countries. Like if you are going from the EU to the US, although they just recently started like a program called ESTA, that maybe you need to get just a permit, but the permit it's quite easy to get, so you can get it in about 5-10 minutes. I don't see any reason why Africa doesn't get to that level. But if we continue to say and point the finger at racism, the question there would now be, what are our governments doing to improve the GDP? We've seen from the facts that have been shared today that it's basically based on your GDP. That's what determines whether your country will be granted, the nationals will be granted the visa. So it's important we look inwards as well and look at what we also can do. Then also, I think it's also important that I mention that there are two main categories of visas. There's either the non-immigrant and the immigrant. Now, if you're applying for the non-immigrant, because of the socio-economic status of a lot of the African countries we've referred to, the problem there is that a lot of the embassies would have the impression, or you have to be able to show them that you're not trying to relocate, to this other country, or you are not trying to, as Linda mentioned, jump the visa at the end of the day. So it's not, and I think it's, Linda mentioned it as well, getting proper advice as well. Because a lot of times, some of the visas may have some technicalities involved. Look, if I just give a random example, if you're applying for the UK visa and you are filling the online form, there are two questions. For me, it's like a trick question for somebody that does not understand the process. How much do you earn in your country? How much do you intend to spend on your trip? There's no way that if you are someone that does not understand the process, will just answer the questions and just feel that I've answered the questions. But the truth is that if you don't really understand those questions, then it means that you will get a visa refusal. So that is another reason why it's important to seek proper advice. And a lot of people that eventually do that and apply for the visa, it improves the probability of getting the visa. You cannot, in effect, say that 100% you will get your visa, but the chances that you would get your visa are higher if you seek proper advice. So as I said, one, let's look inwards and look at how we, as African countries, can develop ourselves to the level that we have enough human capital to export, and secondly, of course, seek proper advice. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those two key takeaways that, as Africans, we need, to create leverage. What are we leveraging as a government for our citizens to be able to move to these countries? And more importantly, seek advice. Seek advice. If you're applying for a visa, seek advice, whether legal advice or monetary advice, so that you are able to do your application the correct way. Let me move to Dorothy. And Dorothy, I will ask you the same question. What do you think can be done? You have mentioned some of the points, but if there is anything you would like to add, and also make your final remarks in terms of what can be done to make this process fair.
Thank you, Jackson. So yes, I just to join hands with what my colleagues have said. Absolutely, I agree. We need to leverage. We need to, because at the end of the day, migration is a push-pull factor. Why would anyone want, like let me say Kenya? Why would we want to let people from outside come and overwhelm our already overwhelmed social systems, whatever. Our first point, or the first consideration that any country will look at, is what benefit is this person bringing? So once you can establish that, once you can make yourself attractive or prove that you are more profitable to that country, then I guess it will be easier for them to then want you to, so to speak, in plain terms. That said, I also still want to believe that our governments can do more. And honestly, racism, of course, does play a big part, just as their own research has shown. But I think one way of solving this problem is after leveraging on our strong points, we can enter into bilateral agreements with countries that are more favorable to us. I saw on, I don't know if it's called Twitter or now it's called X, but I saw the Director General of Kenya, Madam Evelyn, just posted just 8 days ago that they've had a meeting with the German delegation. And in that meeting, they're exploring of how Kenyans can access the German job market. Obviously, this is happening because Germany then, I think, needs people to go and do these jobs because of their demographics. So the key takeaways from that meeting are that they're exploring a bilateral agreement for seamless job access in Germany for Kenyans. And they are in discussions, they're in ongoing discussions on ongoing reforms to simplify visa and work permit processes for Kenyans on how Kenyans can go to Germany. So you see, bilateral talks can also bear fruits, quicker fruits, in my view, to ensure that then Africans enjoy this. Like this, it is the same situation that happened with Kenya, South Africa, that now we have visa-free travel to South Africa. So I want to believe that one of the ways in which we can solve this problem from a policies and government standpoint is that through bilateral agreements. Secondly, I also want to maybe say that because it is a problem and it needs addressing, you will find like, because as you can see, I work with refugees. So just the same way refugees are advocated for by strongly present international organizations like the UNHCR and the IOM, we can say that fine, visa applications, especially maybe for students, is an issue. These students, we can then, in quotes, call them like, identify them maybe as a vulnerable group. One, they want to access international education, they can't access because of what? Visa denials. So like if we can advocate and lobby for a strong international group which can then take up this issue of visa rejection. And I'm happy that Marta has mentioned that she's lobbying and she's pushing or using her connection at IOM to see if they can take up now this segment of visa refusal to then alleviate this problem. Once you have such a big international organization limelighting this as a problem, then I believe it is one step to, of course, getting solutions. And lastly, I want to say, just having this webinar, having this conversation with people from around the world is also a big and a nice effort that we are taking towards addressing the issue. Once a problem is already being addressed, it is half solved. So I want to just encourage that let us continue having this conversation and let us keep on doing everything within our capacity, within our spaces to see and to bring change to this area of visa refusals. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dorothy, and I agree. We need to engage more on this topic. Let us have our voices heard outside there. Let people know what we think about the whole issue of visa. And as most of the panelists have said, I think we need to do some bit of reciprocity, so that if we are giving you a visa, your country is getting visa-free entry into our country, then we would also need you to give us, the same treatment. But more to that is that we need to build leverage, as Kunle has said, so that when we're saying we want visa-free policies to your country, we have something to show for it. I think if Linda can hear me, I will ask her to make final remarks, and then we can go to the Q&A. I'm so sorry we are 12 minutes late, but I think this discussion has been so illuminating, and we need to, maybe arrange another session so that we are able to discuss this at length. But if Linda, you can hear me, give your final thoughts. Wilson, I think Linda mentioned that she, will not be able to, Wahome, if you can hear me, could you take us through the Q&A?
Yes, Jack, I hear you clearly. But in the interest of time, I think I'll just pose about 2 questions to the panelists. I think what we will try and do is collate the questions beyond this session, and we'll probably put out the responses to the questions that have been raised during the session. And so I think one of the most intriguing questions that I have taken note of is one by from Charles Moneki. And he says that thank you for the insightful comments from all the panelists. And I'd like to raise a question on the back of the comments presented, that there have been many reasons given to support the rejection arguments and tips and tricks to mitigate one's exposure to the said rejection. So he asks that as a potential applicant, would my application success rate be within my control, or are we broadly looking at an opaque box that is as random as it has been? So I think basically he's just asking whether there's any hope for him, or whether there's anything he can do to ensure that his application goes through. And I think if Mr. Kunle is able to speak, I'll request him to just give an insight into this question.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. I think Dorothy had mentioned that it deals with discretion. It's at the discretion of the consular officer to determine whether they would issue the visa or not. It's also important to know that the burden of proof is with the applicant. So you have to show them evidence. So the impression they have is everybody is not coming back. They don't have plans of coming back. But if you are able to show me enough evidence to prove that you, for instance, you have ties, ties would usually have to do with maybe family or employment in the country, or you are able to show me that you are gainfully employed. I think that's the most critical thing. Then also, if you seek advice, a lot of times there are things that you may feel that are quite minute. I think Linda mentioned it in one of her points when she mentioned that when you put a lump sum of money in your account and you apply for a visa, what the essence of asking for your bank statement is for them to review your account history. So if they see that a certain lump sum has been put in your account, that's automatically a red flag. And once a red flag is raised, then it's very simple. It's very easy for them to refuse the visa. Then things like having issues with your data, for instance, with your birth dates, for instance. You have people that maybe the birth date on their passport is different from the birth date on their birth certificate. So things like that, once they see things like that, automatically they refuse the visa. But if you have someone go through the application with you and point out the things that you need to note, then I think it goes a long way in improving the probability of you getting the visa. Now, that's for documents only. There are some interviews, like the US interview, for instance, which is a face-to-face interview. You must be able to tell the consular officer what you are going to do there. You must be able to tell them where you are going to stay. They will not ask you for the documents. A lot of times, and somebody mentioned, I think the lady that was refused when she was going for a church program mentioned, sometimes the US embassy will not ask you for the documents. If they want to hear that you know what you are going to do. So if you say that you're going for a conference, for instance, and you're not able to tell them the city you're going to, you're not able to tell them who is inviting you, then automatically the visa will be refused. So sometimes you may need to do a mock interview with the lawyer, just to be able to gain that confidence and have an understanding of the kind of questions that they would ask you when you get there. But as much as possible, I always advise people that when you have a genuine reason to travel, and you are able to show them all the evidence that you need to show them, the chances that you will get the visa is quite high. But when the plan is that you want to apply for a visitor's visa, but when you get to the country, you would overstay the visa, then that is where the issue lies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kunde, and thank you to all our panelists for gracing this event and giving you your amazing insights. Also, a special thanks to our attendees who have been here since we started. And this is a discussion that we need, to further, not only on this Zoom platform, but on all our social media engagement. If you have any question, feel free to reach out on our social media handles at Lawyers Hub Kenya, and let us continue engaging. If you need any advisory, if you are a foreigner, you want to come to Kenya, to do any business, feel free to reach out to the Lawyers Hub. We'll be able to help you with getting your visa or that work permit. If you need to travel outside, to these Western countries and you need legal advice, at the Lawyers Hub, we are open to offer you the advice. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending this session, and have a lovely day, and bye-bye, everyone.